Hey everyone, this is going to be a little bit of a different episode. I want to talk about listening to music and mixing and mastering at a very consistent level. And what do I mean by that? I mean not changing the volume position on your interface like ever, at all pretty much. Let me show you. So for example, on my interface here, this knob and this little green light line up with these meters at the top, and that is the position I have chosen to leave it at all times. Now, what do I mean by all times? I mean like 99% of the time. 98, we'll call it 98% of the time. I am mixing at that volume, I'm listening to music at that volume, and I'm like, if I'm using my interface, it's at that volume. Here is the reason why. Because when you are trying to learn a room, and learn how to mix and learn your speakers, every time you change the volume, how that environment sounds changes. It's totally different. There's a lot that goes into this. I don't know the scientific terms that are out there, but essentially the loudness of something changes how we perceive its sound. So things can sound brighter or darker, they can sound more dynamic or less dynamic. We lose the ability to perceive differences in volume at different volumes as well. So in general, if we're listening louder, we can't tell that two things are not very close in volume to each other because it's all just coming at us so loud. Where if we listen quietly, that difference in level becomes more apparent. So it's a giant variable that is constantly confusing us. So if we don't stop changing the volume while we're mixing, we never really figure out where we're at. We don't know how we're actually mixing. We don't know if the decisions we're making are actually accurate or even good decisions at all. I first got turned on to this idea when I was being taught some tips for how to mix TV shows. And those guys, they swear by this. This is the way they do it. Their rooms are calibrated around a certain volume. And it's because they need to be able to know how loud the audience, you, when you're watching a movie, are going to perceive the volume of somebody talking. It's really important that that comes off natural and that they can quickly level out the dialogue of the actors that have been recorded and make it work. And if you are constantly moving the volume, you might have cranked it up and then somebody whispers and you're like, yeah, that seems loud. And then somebody yells and you go, oh, turn that down, listen again. Oh yeah, it doesn't seem too loud anymore. But you haven't actually changed anything. You've just changed the loudness of how you're hearing it. And it is the same with music, but it also has all of those benefits I mentioned earlier, where we also need to make sure that we know how it actually sonically sounds and if our leveling and balancing of our entire mix isn't garbage. So if you're following along and you think you want to do this, the next step is just to choose a volume for your mixing. And we'll get into using other volumes because there's going to be two other volumes I recommend. But choosing your first one, it should be not too loud. I think it should actually be conversational. If somebody else was in the room, once heard somebody say you should be able to hear your keyboard too loudly if you were typing while listening, and I think that's true. It should be pretty quiet. And the reason you want it to not be so loud is because you don't want ear fatigue and you don't want hearing damage, both of which are just going to happen if you are a mixing or mastering engineer or a musician. It's kind of a matter of when, not if, unfortunately. So you want to do your best to minimize that damage and also just make your life a lot better. Hearing fatigue, ear fatigue, I don't think that gets talked about a lot outside of being mixing engineers. I don't think the bands I recorded ever really were like, I wonder how his ear fatigue is doing while he's mixing our album. It's a thing. If you listen to too loud, your ears get tired and you start getting a headache and you start being unable to tell if the decisions you're making are good decisions. And that is a huge reason why people recommend mixing quieter, is because you're not going to hit ear fatigue as soon, which means you can work longer. Mixing songs takes a lot of time. I would say on average, most people take about a day to mix a song, but that's like a full day. And if you can't make it through the full day without ear fatigue, it's going to take a lot longer. Time's kind of the enemy, I think, because it gets stale, right? You want momentum. So mix quiet, choose a quiet volume. Mine's definitely not that loud. It works for me. Now onto other volumes, because there's another button on this interface called the dim switch, and that's like my favorite button. It's the button I definitely use the most on this interface. I use it more than the volume knob because I've got it set to drop my mix, I think 18 dB. I'll have to check, but quite a bit. It gets really quiet. And like I mentioned earlier, the quieter something is, the more you can tell the difference in dynamic volume between different instruments. So it's really good for double checking the balancing you did and be like, okay, is that snare way too loud? Click the dim switch. Oh yeah, it's really loud. It always is. Turn it down, go back to your normal volume. So that is one alternative volume. And notice how I'm not turning the knob, it's just 2 spots. And I know those 2 spots like the back of my hand because I use them so much. The third volume is loud. And this you use very rarely. Unfortunately, it's going to be what you want to use the most because loud feels good, feels and sounds good, but like I mentioned earlier, it's not actually sustainable and it doesn't necessarily tell us a lot. But we use loud to tell if it feels good. And that is important. We want to know, does it hit? You know, does the kick hit me in the chest? Is that course punching on that impact? I also think that if that course doesn't punch you in the chest when you have it on a low volume, then you haven't done the job really. So don't use loud volume to trick yourself into thinking something's good. But it is just nice to check the mix at a couple spots at that volume. But in general, a medium quiet volume is going to be where you want to live 90% of the time, 98% of the time. That dim button will be very useful as well, so use that. And then you can crank it up every once in a while. But don't have arbitrary, just jumping around volumes that aren't consistent. That's the biggest enemy here. Now, one point of confusion is that you set your volume on your interface and then you open up a new session and it seems quiet. And you're like, well, this doesn't make sense. We set the volume on the interface, but these files are quieter, so it's not as loud. So I'm not hearing that at the same volume, but that is actually as intended because now you know, yeah, we're quiet. So if you are bringing things up in level, AKA mastering of some kind, or dynamic shaping the dynamic range, I should say, you have an actual baseline. The idea that you could even tell that these files were quiet or are currently mixed quiet is exactly the point. Because if you didn't have that optimized volume on your interface, you wouldn't have known at all, right? It's because you have that baseline that you were even able to tell that. Alternatively, if something just seemed totally crushed and loud, you would know, yeah, this is loud because that's way louder than what I'm used to hearing with all my other work that I, base around this volume. So it's all about giving yourself a context and a baseline where you can understand the relationship between what you're hearing and what you know is your average. I'm realizing it's kind of confusing to describe. I hope this is making sense, but even if it's not, I really just trust me on this. Choose a volume that feels good. Make sure, again, it's not too loud, and try this and just only work at that volume. I swear you'll get your mixes done faster. If you're doing rough mixes, you'll be so happy. It just will come together way quicker. And the ear fatigue thing, I bet you'll thank me for that as well. Totally rambly one, confusing as heck. I hope it helped. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you like this type of content. And if you want a free mixing workshop that'll take you through how to get better mixes of your own songs with the tools you already own so you don't have to buy any plugins or anything, check out the free link down below. It's called the Standout Mixes Workshop. That'll be in the description of this video. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. We'll be back with another one next week. Take care.